Hey, Soul Stories fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and join our family. Now stay with us. The story begins. The conference room was dead silent. Not the polite kind of silence. The kind that comes from people who are used to watching someone get stripped bare in front of a crowd. Lucy Morgan stood straight beside the screen, back upright, shoulders open. Her gaze didn't waver. Her design filled the wall behind her. Warm light, bold lines, a space built to make people want to stay. Alexander Vale looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds. Then he looked up. Beautiful, he said. One word. Cold. Brief. Lucy didn't smile. She waited. But soulless. The entire room froze. Alex continued, his voice even, as if reading a financial report. Are you designing a room or telling a sad story? No one dared to cough. No one dared to move. Lucy tilted her head as if genuinely considering the question. Both, she said, because people don't live in empty rooms. They live inside their own stories. A few people held their breath. At the far end of the table, Mia clenched her pen. Alex didn't like being answered back. Everyone knew that. Clients don't pay for emotions, he said. They pay for impact. Lucy nodded, then she smiled. A very dangerous smile. Then perhaps, she said, we're selling to the wrong kind of client. Boom. The air in the conference room exploded into silence. Alex stared at Lucy. 1 second. 2 seconds. Meeting adjourned, he said coldly. Lucy, revise it. Cut the storytelling. I want a new version by Friday. He stood up without waiting for a response. Lucy didn't say another word. She closed her laptop, walked straight back to her desk. Mia slipped up beside her and whispered, "At least he didn't tell you to go back to kindergarten." Lucy opened her computer and replied calmly, "He's probably afraid the teacher would agree with me." No hesitation, no tears. Lucy opened a new file, resignation_LucyMorgan.pdf. 10 minutes later, it was finished. Short, clean, no excess emotion. Lucy stood up, didn't look back. Alex's office door was open. He was on the phone. When he saw Lucy, he gestured for her to wait. Lucy didn't wait. She walked in, placed the paper on his desk, right in the center. Alex stopped his call. "What is this?" he asked. "My resignation," Lucy replied. Alex chuckled softly, the smile of someone who thought he was still in control. "Because I criticized your design?" Lucy crossed her arms. "No, because of 3 years." Alex's smile vanished. He picked up the paper, skimmed it, then looked up. "You're overreacting." Lucy leaned forward, planting both hands on his desk. Close enough that he had no choice but to meet her eyes. "No," she said, enunciating every word. "I'm filtering." Alex narrowed his eyes. "Filtering what?" "I'm not quitting my profession," Lucy said, her voice calm to the point of cold. "I'm quitting the way you treat people." 1 second. 2 seconds. Alexander Vale, the man no one had ever walked away from, stood frozen. Lucy straightened, turned toward the door. "You won't have a new version on Friday," she said over her shoulder, "but you'll have time to think about why the best people always leave." The door closed, softly. The entire office watched Lucy walk past. No one stopped her. Mia ran after her, eyes shining. "You just did the craziest thing of your life." Lucy shrugged. "No, I just did the right one." Behind the glass door, Alexander Vale stood motionless. For the first time in his life, a woman walked away without his permission, and that left him unable to breathe. On the first day Lucy Morgan stepped into Aurora Living, what made her pause wasn't the company sign or the reception desk. It was the unfamiliar feeling that no one was judging her. There were no probing glances, no heavy silence of, "Let's see what she's capable of." No familiar sense that one wrong sentence could get her entire career annotated in red ink. The only thing that caught Lucy's eye was a golden retriever lying right across the entrance, lifting its head to look at her with the highly professional expression of an employee who had decided it was taking the day off. "Good morning," Lucy said out of reflex, not entirely sure who she was greeting. The dog wagged its tail. "That's Miles," a female voice said behind her. He doesn't bite, doesn't judge, and absolutely does not send emails at 11 at night. Lucy turned around to see Isabella Chen standing there. White blazer casually draped over her shoulders, a simple t-shirt underneath, hair tied low, a smile so relaxed that Lucy needed a few seconds to be sure this wasn't some staged, fake-friendly interview act. Isabella extended her hand. Welcome to Aurora Living. I'm Isabella, CEO, worst coffee maker in the company, and someone who believes that if you're not happy, your designs will be ugly. Lucy laughed, a real laugh escaping before she could stop herself. It had been a long time since she'd laughed like that, not out of politeness, not as armor, but because that statement was dangerously logical. Following Isabella inside, Lucy felt as if she'd slipped into another dimension. The office opened up with real plants, real leaves, real sunlight pouring through large glass windows. Jazz music played somewhere, not loud enough to demand attention, but enough to slow her breathing. Someone was sketching on a glass board. Someone sat cross-legged on the floor with a laptop on their knees. Two people were having a rather heated debate about whether warm lighting made people more likely to fall in love. And no one, absolutely no one, looked miserable about being at work. Is this working hours? Lucy asked, unable to hide her skepticism. Isabella shrugged. Mostly, sometimes it's group therapy. They passed the kitchen area, where fresh bread and fruit were laid out. Not the sad kind of break room with a microwave and burnt coffee. On the wall hung a small sign written in marker. If you take the last piece, you're responsible for smiling at the next person. Lucy stopped to read it, then shook her head with a smile. No one checks when people clock in, she asked. No, Isabella replied. We check results and the level of soul damage. Lucy didn't know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded, carrying with her the strange feeling that maybe some places really did operate differently from anything she'd known before. Lucy's desk was near a window, flooded with natural light. A small potted plant already sat on the surface, along with a handwritten name card, Lucy Morgan, Spatial Experience Designer. Isabella mentioned almost casually that she'd always believed people who designed spaces needed to live in decent spaces first. Lucy set her bag down gently, as if afraid of breaking the moment. Oh, and there's only one rule, Isabella added. If you have an idea, you have to say it, even if it's not perfect, even if it's silly, even if it makes you a little embarrassed. Lucy let out a soft laugh. I just left a place where sharing ideas was basically career suicide. Then welcome to the opposite, Isabella said, without a hint of sarcasm. Lucy's first meeting unfolded in a way that nearly made her think she was being pranked. No one sat at the head of the table, no endless PowerPoint slides. No one is saying, that idea isn't feasible. Just a circle, coffee, cookies, and one very simple opening question. Lucy, what do you think? She froze, genuinely. Opened her mouth, then closed it again. You mean, I'm actually being asked? The question slipped out before she could stop herself. A curly-haired guy sitting across from her laughed. We asked to listen, not to judge. Lucy took a deep breath, then spoke. She talked about light, about a sense of safety, about how people don't just need to see a space, they need to inhabit it. No one interrupted her. Some nodded, some took notes, some blurted out that they'd never thought about it that way before. When Isabella concluded that Lucy would lead that part of the project, Lucy nearly asked, Don't we need approval from 3 levels of management? Isabella just smiled. You're the expert. We trust you. Trust. A short word. But Lucy realized she'd forgotten what it felt like to hear it in a work setting. At lunch, Lucy ate with everyone out on the sunny balcony. Miles lay at her feet, his head resting on her shoe as if he'd decided she belonged here. Mia texted to ask if she was okay. Lucy sent back a photo of the office and typed, I think I forgot I even knew how to smile like this. The afternoon drifted by slowly. The jazz shifted to a slower track. Lucy sat refining a new sketch. No one rushing her, no one checking in. Just her, the light, and a familiar feeling she hadn't touched in a long time. The feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Lucy leaned back in her chair, eyes closed for a single breath. For the first time in a long while, she didn't need to be on guard. And somewhere in her chest, an old but familiar laugh was quietly making its way back. Not forced, not cautious, just hers. If there was one thing Lucy Morgan learned during her months at Aurora Living, it was this. Talent does not bloom in fear. It blooms in trust. And when placed in the right soil, it doesn't just grow, it ignites. Lucy had never worked this much and felt so light. Ideas came faster than her morning coffee. Her sketches were no longer dissected to hunt for mistakes, but unfolded to uncover potential. She was given major projects, trusted with authority, and asked for her opinion not to check a box, but because people genuinely wanted to know what she thought. Meetings ended with laughter, emails ended with thank you, and workdays ended without Lucy having to ask herself whether she had done something wrong. Success arrived quietly but firmly. A light-filled resort she led was mentioned in the press. A major client signed a contract extension after Lucy herself presented the concept. Isabella joked that Lucy brought a sun effect to Aurora. Wherever she stood, people began to believe that good ideas were worth pursuing to the very end. Lucy only smiled, but inside she knew she was living days she had once never been allowed to dream of. Being recognized, being trusted, giving everything to her craft without having to defend herself. Then that morning arrived, light like any other morning, until it wasn't. Isabella called everyone into the large conference room. Her tone remained upbeat, but Lucy caught the caution carefully hidden in her eyes. When the screen lit up, Aurora Living's logo appeared, then faded to make room for a name so familiar it felt as though someone had just pulled the floor out from under Lucy's feet. Vail Group, a massive real estate conglomerate, a name tied to years when Lucy believed she had to shrink herself just to survive. The room buzzed. Some were excited, some anxious. Some whispered about opportunity, resources, and new doors opening. Lucy didn't clearly hear any of it. Her ears rang. Her heart beat in a strange way. Not fast, not slow, but heavy. Isabella spoke about the deal, about how Aurora would retain its culture, about this being a chance to expand, to go further, to bring their human-centered design philosophy to more places. Lucy nodded on instinct. She wanted to believe. She had believed, until the internal email arrived. No embellishment, no detours, just one short, precise, and ruthless line. Alexander Vail, Executive Director of Design and Strategic Development at Vail Group, will directly oversee strategic alignment during the integration phase. Lucy went still. Not the dramatic kind of shock you see in movies. She didn't drop anything. She didn't gasp. It was simply the sensation that every sound in the room had suddenly been turned down, as if someone had twisted the volume knob of her life to its lowest setting. Alexander Vail. That name had once been a wall, a shadow, a voice that made her doubt her own instincts. And now it was back, without knocking, without permission, without warning. She looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking. That surprised her. She had always thought that if this day ever came, she would panic. But no, what Lucy felt was discomfort, like discovering an old scar was still there, even though you had lived very well without thinking about it for a long time. Isabella kept talking about the new structure, about how the Vail Group was known for letting subsidiaries operate independently, about how nothing would change tomorrow. Lucy listened to every word, placing each one carefully in her mind, then told herself, very calmly, very clearly, "It's fine. He is a corporation. I am a person. We don't live in the same world." Alexander Vail could be just a name in an email, a signature at the bottom of a report, someone sitting somewhere very high up, very far away, very busy. Lucy was no longer the girl standing trembling in a conference room waiting to be judged. She had a job. She had value. She had a place that had proven exactly how good she was when put in the right environment. The past was the past, and the past should stay exactly where it belonged. The meeting ended with cautious applause. People began discussing, analyzing, and speculating. Lucy stood, picked up a glass of water, and took a slow sip. Cool, real, present. She looked around the office. Plants, sunlight, familiar laughter. Nothing here belonged to Alexander Vail. Nothing here had been built on fear. Aurora was not the Veil Concept Lab, and Lucy was no longer the Lucy she used to be. Mia texted her just one line. "Did you hear the news yet? Are you okay?" Lucy replied immediately. "Just finished the merger announcement meeting. I'm fine. It's just a name." And she believed it, at least in that moment. Lucy returned to her desk, opened her unfinished drawing, adjusted a line of light, jotted down a few new ideas. Work pulled her back into reality, something more solid than any memory. She leaned back in her chair and took a deep breath. If the past came knocking again, this time she didn't need to hide. She just needed not to open the door. Lucy didn't know that. Somewhere else in the same city, Alexander Vale had just finished reading the list of key personnel at Aurora Living, and when his eyes stopped on the name Lucy Morgan, his heart slowed by a single beat, very slightly but enough for him to realize. There are paths that refuse to stay still, even when both sides have tried to move on. That past should have stayed behind, but it had already begun walking toward them. The first strategic meeting after the acquisition was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the morning in Aurora Living's largest conference room. Lucy arrived 5 minutes earlier than usual, not out of nervousness, but out of habit, the instinct of someone used to preparing for every possible scenario. She chose a seat near the window, set her laptop neatly in front of her, and held a warm cup of coffee in her hands. Outside, sunlight fell across the line of trees, so peaceful it was hard to believe that in just a few minutes, the past would walk straight through that door. There was a faint tension in the room, like the air before a rainstorm. People spoke more softly than usual. Smiles were still there, but eyes kept drifting toward the door. Lucy noticed it and found it amusing. Not entertainingly funny, but amusing in the way humans always respond to power. Anticipation, caution, and a bit more nervousness than necessary. Isabella walked in first, still carrying her familiar presence, lightly tapping the table to get everyone's attention. "All right, everyone. Today is the first session of the integration phase. Let's treat it as an open conversation." Lucy took a sip of her coffee. An open conversation. At Veil Concept Lab, that phrase usually meant prepare to be corrected. The door opened. Alexander Vale walked in. Not fast, not slow. Exactly the pace of someone who takes control of a room with the very first step. Dark suit, tall frame, straight shoulders, eyes sweeping the space like a strategic map. Lucy had prepared herself for this moment, yet when he appeared, time still slowed in an uncomfortable way. Their eyes met, only for a brief moment, but long enough for Lucy to notice something very interesting. Alexander Vale stiffened for exactly half a second. Not much. No one else noticed, but Lucy did. It was a tiny hesitation, a scratch in an otherwise flawless motion, something that did not belong to the man she used to know. Alex regained his composure instantly, but that half-second had already happened, and Lucy smiled inwardly. Across the table, a colleague leaned in and whispered to the person next to them, quietly, but not quietly enough for Lucy to miss it. "Why does the CEO look at Lucy like he just saw an old bill?" Lucy nearly choked on her coffee. Alex pulled out his chair and sat in the central seat. He placed his documents on the table, folded his hands, and began to speak, his voice deep, clear, professional. But something had changed. There was no longer a blade hidden in every sentence. No subtle pressure designed to make others doubt themselves. He was simply talking about work in the most literal sense. "Thank you all for being here," Alex said. "Aurora Living is a company with a very distinct identity. My role here is not to change that, but to understand it." Lucy looked up at him for the first time since he'd entered the room. The face was still sharp, still tightly controlled, but his eyes were no longer as cold as she remembered. They were cautious, as if he were stepping onto unfamiliar ground, unsure which parts would hold and which might collapse. Alex continued outlining strategic directions, maintaining the creative team, and respecting the existing culture. Each sentence was carefully chosen, no excess, no imposition. Lucy listened, focused enough to do her job, alert enough to observe. When it came time for open discussion, Isabella turned to Lucy. "Lucy, you're leading the lighting experience project for the Northern Resort. What do you think about the integration approach? A brief silence followed. Lucy felt Alex's gaze shift toward her, not probing, not challenging, but waiting, truly waiting. She set her coffee down, her voice steady. If Vail Group wants to optimize efficiency, the most important thing is not to optimize emotions. What makes Aurora different is that we design for people, not just for the market. No one interrupted. Alex gave a small nod. I agree, and that's exactly why we chose Aurora. Lucy was surprised by his response. She realized she didn't need to be on guard, didn't need to brace herself for a counterattack. His answer wasn't a trap, it was a period. The meeting continued, smoother than anything Lucy had imagined during the anxious days leading up to it. When it ended, people stood up, chairs scraping softly, the atmosphere loosening like a collective exhale. Alex stood last. Before leaving the room, he glanced at Lucy, his gaze lingering just briefly. Not long enough to draw attention, not cold enough to unsettle her, just long enough to say, I see you. Lucy replied with a very slight nod. No challenge, no intimacy, just two adults, standing in different versions of themselves. When the door closed, the person beside Lucy let out a breath. I don't know why, but he seems different from the rumors. Lucy gave a faint smile. Maybe it's the lighting. But deep down, she knew the truth. Some reunions don't explode, aren't dramatic, don't need a climax. They're more dangerous than that. They leave an echo. And the echo of this reunion was just enough for Lucy to understand one thing. The past wasn't just coming back. It was slowly stepping into the present. The Light Resort project began on a quiet afternoon when sunlight slanted through the tall glass windows of Aurora Living, leaving slow streaks of gold across the wooden floor. Lucy stood in front of the glass board, marker in hand, her posture so relaxed it was hard to believe she was carrying the weight of a multi-million-dollar project. She didn't speak right away. She looked at the drawings, at the space, the way light could move through people, not just through walls and ceilings. Alex sat at the far end of the conference room. He was used to observing others the way he observed data, fast, precise, emotionless. But this time his gaze lingered longer than intended. Lucy wasn't trying to present. She wasn't selling an idea. She was telling a story, not with flowery language, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. When guests walk in, Lucy said, her voice low and steady, the first thing they need isn't to be overwhelmed. They need to breathe. The light here won't hit directly. It will glide, like a greeting. The room fell silent. Not the tense kind of silence, but the kind that comes when people are truly listening. Lucy turned and drew a curved line on the board. The light was layered, guided, held back in pauses, whose value only those who had once been exhausted could truly understand. Alex noticed something that unsettled him in a strangely uncomfortable way. No one was watching Lucy, waiting for her to make a mistake. They were watching her because they trusted she would lead them somewhere worth going. She asked questions, but not to control. She listened without surrendering leadership. She refined other people's ideas, not diminishing them, but making them better. Alex had always believed leadership meant standing at the center. Lucy led by opening the space around her. When a young architect hesitantly offered an opinion, Lucy didn't interrupt. She nodded, asked a follow-up question, and carried the conversation forward so the idea no longer stood alone. When someone disagreed, Lucy didn't grow defensive. She smiled, tilted her head, and asked, if that's the case, how will the guest's emotional experience change? The question made the entire room pause, not because it was forced, but because it was right. Alex sat there, his fingers interlaced, and for the first time in a very long while, he couldn't find a flaw. Not because Lucy was perfect, but because she was right. A rightness that didn't come from pleasing authority, but from understanding people. Lucy was no longer a woman standing tall, enduring. She stood tall because she no longer needed to bow. The light in the room reflected across her face, softening her features without dulling the sharpness in her eyes. She shone not because she wanted to be seen, but because she was standing exactly where she belonged. Alex felt his throat go dry. He remembered meetings from years ago, where Lucy stood before a long, cold table, her voice more cautious than necessary, her eyes always seeming to wonder whether she had spoken too much. He had called that insecurity. He had believed he was shaping her. But the woman in front of him now, the one making the entire room move to her rhythm, didn't look like someone who had been fixed. She looked like someone who had been restored to her true form. The meeting ended. People left the room with an unfamiliar energy, light but full. Lucy capped the marker, closed her laptop, and turned to speak softly with her colleagues. She smiled. Not big, not deliberate. The easy smile of someone who had just finished doing what she loved. Alex stood up more slowly than usual. He watched Lucy step into the sunlit hallway. No one avoided him. No one seemed cautious. But Lucy didn't turn back to look for his gaze. She no longer needed that kind of validation. And that, of all things, hurt him in a way he couldn't quite name. Maybe, Alex thought, standing alone in the empty conference room, the light still lingering on the glass board. Maybe I was wrong. Not wrong in a decision, not wrong in a single sentence, but wrong in believing he could bend a human being into something better. Lucy Morgan was no longer the woman he had once hurt. She was living proof of the opposite, that when a woman is trusted, heard, and allowed to be herself, she doesn't just return, she shines. The crisis arrived on a bleak morning when the gray sky pressed down on the city like a forecast that needed no explanation. Aurora Living's largest client, the corporation that owned a chain of coastal resorts, sent an urgent email with a chilling subject line, concern regarding project direction. Just one line, but enough to trigger a cascade of phone calls, overlapping meetings, and the familiar feeling that a small deviation could easily be magnified into a total failure. Lucy read the email 3 times, not because she didn't understand it, but because she understood it all too well. The client was anxious, and when clients are anxious, they look for something to hold on to. And more often than not, that something is the project lead. The large conference room quickly filled up. The leadership team sat on one side. The client representatives appeared on the screen, faces tense, voices sharp and urgent. Questions came rapidly about the lighting strategy, about commercial viability, about whether Aurora was straying too far from what was easy to sell. Lucy stood there, back straight, hands resting lightly on the table, listening to every word. No deflection, no hasty reactions. She was used to this feeling. So used to it that her body automatically raised its familiar defenses, even though her mind knew this was no longer Vail Concept Lab. Alex sat opposite the leadership team. Lucy noticed he was silent longer than usual. He didn't jump in. He didn't interrupt. When the client finished with a pointed remark suggesting that perhaps Aurora should reconsider who is leading the creative direction, the room seemed to hold its breath. Alex looked up. "No," he said. One word. Short. Clear. No raised voice. Lucy's gaze flickered. "The issue here isn't direction," Alex continued, his voice low and steady, "but expectations that weren't clearly aligned from the start. This project was signed based on an experience-driven design philosophy, and Lucy Morgan is the person who understands that philosophy most deeply on this team." Lucy turned toward him, unable to hide her surprise. Alex didn't look at her. He looked straight at the screen, where the client representative was frowning. "If we want to change direction, that's a strategic discussion, not a search for someone to blame. And I will not allow an individual to be placed in that position." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The sharp edges softened. The pressure was no longer aimed at Lucy. The leadership team began asking different questions. How to adjust, how much to adjust, how to adapt without losing identity. Lucy listened, answered when asked, but for most of the time she simply observed. Alex was doing something she had never seen him do before. He was standing with people, not in power. The meeting ended after nearly 2 hours. Exhausting, but not destructive. As people filed out, Lucy quietly gathered her documents. She didn't know what she was waiting for, or what she was avoiding, until she realized that only 2 people remained in the room. Alex closed the door. The sound was soft, but enough to make the room feel smaller. He stood there for a few seconds as if rearranging something inside himself. When he spoke, his voice was no longer that of someone running a meeting. "I didn't see you properly," he said, slowly, clearly, with no padding in front of the words. Lucy froze. The sentence wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it landed exactly where she had sealed everything shut for years. Before Alex continued, his eyes fixed on some invisible point on the conference table, "I thought I was pushing you to be better. I thought being harsh would make you stronger. But today, I realized I was wrong." Lucy inhaled. Not deeply, not shakily, but inside her chest, something was striking against the walls, demanding to be named. "An apology doesn't erase the past," she said immediately, her voice sharper than she intended. "What happened doesn't disappear just because you say those two words." Alex nodded. No rebuttal, no justification. "I know." Silence stretched between them, not tense, not gentle, just real. Lucy turned away, taking a few steps toward the window. Outside, the sky was still gray, but the light felt less heavy. She didn't know what she was supposed to feel. Anger? Relief? Or exhaustion at finally hearing something that should have been said a long time ago? "You don't owe me an apology," Lucy said more slowly. "You owe me something different." Alex looked up at her. "I'm trying. Not I will try, but I am." Lucy turned back. Their eyes met, this time with no power, no past standing between them. Just two people facing opposite sides of an old mistake. She nodded very slightly. "I can see that." And that unsettled her more than any apology could have. Lucy left the conference room with a strange feeling. Not forgiveness, not closure, but a small opening that had appeared where she'd once believed everything was sealed shut. She didn't believe in overnight change. She knew that. But she also knew, clearly, that the man standing there today was not entirely the man from the past. Alex remained behind alone, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he had maintained control. He saw only one thing with absolute clarity. The woman he once thought needed fixing had never been the problem. The problem was him, and Lucy, returning to her desk, placing her hand on the familiar drawings, realized her heartbeat was different. Not calm yet, but no longer locked tight. Somewhere deep inside, she began to understand this. Some apologies don't erase the past, but they can open a path that never existed before. Night fell very slowly at Aurora Living. Not the kind of night that crashes down after everyone has gone home, but the kind that lingers, unhurried, as if it too wasn't ready to leave a room still glowing with light. Lucy remained seated in front of the glass board, marker in hand, a few loose strands slipping from her high bun, her jacket draped casually over the back of her chair. The clock read just past 9 p.m., later than usual, but no one was rushing. The Light Resort project had entered a phase that demanded the most delicate decisions, and Lucy knew she wouldn't leave until everything felt right. Alex stood a few steps away, arms crossed, studying the lighting simulation on the screen. The air between them was quiet, not tense, not heavy. An uncommon stillness that Lucy realized she didn't need to guard herself against. "You're sure about the warm light?" Alex asked, his voice low, not imposing. "It creates warmth, but it could make the space feel smaller." Lucy tilted her head, looking at him as if weighing an interesting question rather than a challenge. "White light makes everything clearer," she replied, "but clear doesn't always mean comfortable. People come here to rest, not to inspect technical flaws." Alex curved his mouth slightly. "Are you saying my lighting is emotionless?" "No," Lucy said immediately, then smiled. "Just a little, like a conference room." Alex laughed, actually laughed, a short, unexpected, slightly awkward sound, as if he surprised himself. Lucy paused for a beat, her marker hovering in midair. She couldn't remember the last time she'd heard Alex laugh in a context that wasn't about winning. Maybe. Never. They kept going, but debating no longer felt like the right word. It was more like a conversation, one where both of them were truly listening. Alex asked more than he spoke. Lucy explained, then paused to ask him back. There were moments when they fell silent together, staring at the drawings, and that silence didn't need to be filled. When Lucy's stomach growled softly, but in the quiet room, it sounded like a declaration. Alex looked up. "Are you hungry?" Lucy exhaled. "A little." 15 minutes later, a pizza box sat in the middle of the table. Pepperoni. Nothing fancy. No candles. But the heat and the smell of melted cheese made the room suddenly feel more human. "We're sharing pizza in a conference room," Lucy said, lifting a slice. "If this were a year ago, I'd think I was dreaming." Alex shrugged. "If it were a year ago, I'd think this was a bad idea." Lucy laughed. "And now?" "Now," Alex said slowly, "I'm thinking I've missed quite a lot." Lucy glanced at him. She didn't ask, didn't push, just a glance. And that was enough for him to continue. "The way people work," Alex said, "the way you work. I used to think control was the only way to get results. But watching you lead the team, I realized there's another way." Lucy chewed slowly. She didn't rush to answer. She'd learned that honest words often needed space to exist. "What way?" she asked. Alex thought. Really thought. "Trust and permission." Lucy nodded. "Sounds simple." "Not at all," Alex said immediately. "It's much harder." They turned back to the drawings. Warm light was kept in the resting areas. White light guided movement. The compromise came so naturally that Lucy realized she'd been smiling without noticing. Alex stood closer as he pointed out a small detail. The distance between them was close enough for Lucy to notice the familiar scent of coffee on his jacket. Not cologne. The scent of a long day. A real day. "Here," Alex said, then paused. "I mean, what do you think?" Lucy looked up at him. The light reflected in his eyes, softening features that were usually sharp. That question, "What do you think?" no longer made her cautious. It made her feel invited. She answered. He listened. Truly listened. And when Lucy finished, Alex nodded, smiling faintly. "You always have a way of making things easier to breathe in." Lucy blinked. A casual comment. But it stayed in her chest longer than it should have. They worked until nearly midnight. As Lucy packed up, she realized she wasn't tired at all. The only thing making her heart beat faster than usual was a thought that was very unprofessional, very unreasonable, and very hard to ignore. "This is dangerous," Lucy thought as she slipped on her jacket and turned off the lights. "He's really changing. He's becoming likable. Not because of grand words, not because of dramatic transformations, but because of small things. The way he asked, the way he listened, the slightly awkward laugh when she caught him out. A fire that didn't blaze immediately, but smoldered, patient, steady, and warm enough to make you forget how close you were standing to it." Lucy stepped into the dark hallway, her heart lighter, her pace slower. She didn't know where this was heading. She only knew that for the first time in a long while, she didn't want to leave too quickly. And behind her, Alex lingered for a second before turning off the lights, looking into the now empty room with a strange feeling, as if he'd just experienced an ordinary work session, yet carried with it the afterglow of something beginning to unfold slowly and not to be rushed. Rain fell steadily against the glass walls, as if the city were deliberately setting the backdrop for a moment no one had scheduled. Lucy leaned against the desk, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, her eyes following the streams of water sliding down the window. She didn't turn around when she heard the familiar footsteps behind her. "Lucy," Alex said, his voice lower than usual. "I need to talk." "That sounds serious," she replied, still looking outside. "I hope it's not about me increasing warm lighting by 3%. Alex let out a soft laugh, then stopped, as if remembering that the reason he was here wasn't nearly that light. "No, not that." Lucy turned around. The office lights reflected in her eyes, bright, alert. "Then say it. But if you're about to give me a lecture on emotional management, I'd like to officially take a break." Alex shook his head, half helpless, half drawn in. "I like you." The sentence landed between them, so direct that even he hadn't managed to cushion it with anything else. Lucy blinked. 1 second. 2. Then she exhaled. "Oh," just one word. but Alex felt his heartbeat skip. Let me guess, Lucy continued, setting her coffee down. You've just gone through a leadership awakening, discovered the power of listening and respecting people, and somewhere along the way, boom, you realize you have feelings. Alex winced. Do I really sound like a case study? Very much so, Lucy replied, the corner of her mouth lifting. And I have no intention of becoming slide number 7 in the presentation titled Alex Vale, From Control to Empathy. He laughed, this time more freely. You're not my lesson. Good, Lucy said immediately, because I've already finished school, graduated with honors. She stepped a little closer but didn't cross the safe distance. Her voice softened, still edged with clear-headed humor. Listen, Alex, I don't hate the fact that you like me. Honestly, if there were nothing there, that would be worrying. Alex looked at her, relieved and tense at the same time. So then... Hold on, Lucy raised a hand, like calling for a pause in a meeting. Feelings are not strategies, and I don't rush into contracts with things that have a history of causing damage. He nodded. I'm not asking you to rush. Then let's agree on a few things, Lucy said, her tone like she was negotiating a very important deal, and in some ways she was. 1, slow, very slow, like a snail climbing uphill in fog. Alex smiled. Slow. 2, boundaries, clear ones. If I ever have to ask myself, is this work or flirting? That's already a violation. Boundaries, he repeated seriously. 3, Lucy concluded, no impact on work, no favoritism, no special looks in meetings. If you break that, I leave, Alex finished for her. Lucy nodded. Exactly. I run very fast. A second of silence passed, then Alex chuckled softly. You know, this is the most romantic negotiation I've ever been part of. Lucy raised an eyebrow. I have a more detailed terms sheet if you need it. He looked at her, his gaze softer now, stripped of its usual calculation. Thank you for not saying no right away. Lucy shrugged. I didn't say no. I just said, carefully. She turned back to her desk, picked up her bag. Now, unless there's another item on today's emotional agenda, I'm heading out. Tomorrow I have a resort to save. Alex opened the door for her. Just before stepping out, Lucy stopped and turned back. Oh, Alex? Yeah, you're becoming dangerous. He smiled. Because I like you? No, Lucy replied, her smile half teasing, half sincere. Because you're learning how to be lovable. The door closed behind her, leaving Alex standing there, heart lighter, mind more tangled. And for the first time, he didn't want to find a way to control his feelings. He just wanted to let them move slowly, exactly the way Lucy had set the pace. The launch of the lighting project took place on a gentle, breezy afternoon when the sun had dipped just low enough for the day's final rays to blend into the resort space like a natural breath. Lucy stood quietly along the main pathway, not at the center and not seeking anyone's gaze. She simply stood there, watching how the light gradually flowed across each step, each wall, each resting space she had deliberated over for a long time before deciding. The space was not dominated, it was guided. And in that moment, Lucy knew the project had succeeded, not in a technical sense, but in something far deeper. It touched human emotion. Praise came quickly and all at once. The press called it a turning point in experiential design. Partners spoke of its subtlety, of its ability to make light know how to listen. Her colleagues beamed with pride. Some even pulled her into tight hugs. Lucy received it all with a composed smile. She was used to success at Aurora Living. Previous projects had been recognized, had made an impact. But this time felt different. Not because the scale was larger, not because the praise was louder, but because Alex was there. He didn't step in to explain the concept. He didn't interrupt any professional discussions. When someone asked him about the creative direction, Alex simply shifted slightly, his gaze moving toward Lucy, as if the answer was self-evident, standing right in front of them. When someone tentatively tested the waters, suggesting that certain details might be safer with some adjustments, Alex shook his head very lightly, his voice low but decisive. That was Lucy's decision, and I respect it. The words weren't loud, but they were clear enough for everyone nearby to understand that there was a boundary no one was allowed to cross. Lucy heard it, and her heart faltered for a brief, fleeting beat. 3 years at Vale surged back into her memory. 3 years when every decision she made could be overturned with a single frown. 3 years when Alex held absolute power over her value, in a way so rational she couldn't fight it. She had lived in a constant state of having to be more, faster, better, just to stand still and wait for recognition that never came. In the end, she didn't leave because she failed, but because she could no longer endure having to prove she deserved to exist. And now it was still Alex. Still that man. Still that power. But Lucy was no longer the woman she had been 3 years ago. She no longer tensed, waiting for a reaction. No longer instinctively wondered whether her decisions were allowed. The praise around her no longer held her upright. It was merely external confirmation of something she already knew deep inside. She had done well, and she did well because this was the right place for her. Standing in front of Alex, under his authority, without being haunted, that was the victory she had been seeking for years. The strategic meeting took place 2 days later, while the project's momentum was still fresh. Vale Group's leadership discussed scaling the model, replicating its success. Lucy presented the data, customer feedback, and her observations from real-world experience. No one interrupted. No one questioned her. When she finished, Alex stood. "We talk a lot about strategy," he said calmly without unnecessary emotion. "But strategy only has value when it's led by the right person." He turned to Lucy, unhurried, without performance. "Aurora Living needs a creative director, and Lucy Morgan is the obvious choice." The room fell silent for a few seconds, then nods began to appear. There were no objections, no murmurs, because Lucy's results spoke for themselves. She sat there back straight, feeling her heartbeat slow. She didn't need to seek agreement. She was used to standing on her own. When the meeting ended, Lucy lingered. She turned to Alex and asked directly without evasion, "Are you sure? People will talk." Alex nodded. "I know. I don't want anyone thinking I'm here because of personal feelings." He looked at her for a long time, his gaze no longer that of someone in control, but of someone who had learned how to step back. "I didn't choose you because I love you," Alex said slowly. "I love you because I see you." The words weren't a rushed confession. They were the restoration of value to its rightful place. Lucy understood immediately. She didn't need to be saved. She just needed not to be blocked. And this time, Alex stood exactly where he should, stepping back so she could step forward. Lucy left the conference room as afternoon light spilled through the long hallway, gentle like the very light she had created. An old wound inside her quietly closed. No pain, no scar, only a rare sense of wholeness. She knew with certainty, from this moment on, no one, not even Alex, could define her worth for her ever again. And that was how he proved everything. Not with promises, not with possession, but with consistent action, by protecting her boundaries and by giving her the position she truly deserved. The rain started just as they managed to step into the small cafe on the corner. The doorbell chimed, steam fogged the windows, and the smell of hot coffee immediately softened the world outside. Lucy took off her coat, hung it on the wooden hook, then turned to see Alex still standing there, posture a little stiff, one hand resting on the back of the chair, as if he wasn't quite used to, not preparing for something. She smiled. "Sit down," Lucy said softly. "This place doesn't have tests." Alex let out a small laugh and sat across from her. "I know. You know, but you're still on guard," she teased gently. He nodded honestly. "A little." They ordered coffee. Neither of them spoke much. Rain tapped steadily against the glass, the sound of a spoon touching a cup barely audible. Lucy watched the drops slide down the window, then looked back at Alex. The warm yellow light softened his features, making him feel far less sharp, far more familiar than she had ever known him to be. "Do you come to places like this often?" she asked. "No," Alex answered immediately. "I usually choose places that are easy to control." Lucy raised an eyebrow. "So today you're taking a risk." "Yeah," he said, then smiled. "But it feels okay." They left when the rain eased. The street reflected the lights on the wet pavement, shimmering and calm. Lucy walked slowly, not because she was thinking, simply because she wasn't in a hurry. Alex walked beside her, close enough but not touching, until their hands found each other on their own. Neither of them said anything. Alex held Lucy's hand very lightly, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. Lucy didn't squeeze back, but she didn't pull away either. She just let it be, letting the warmth travel from her palm to her wrist, then up into her chest. No explanations needed, no confirming glances. They walked like that through several streets. Alex didn't say anything, but Lucy could feel it clearly. His hand grew steadier with each step, not because he wanted to hold tighter, but because he was no longer afraid. She tilted her head slightly, resting it very gently against his arm, an unconscious gesture. Alex paused for half a second, then kept walking, slow, careful, as if learning how to carry something precious. Under an awning when the rain returned, Alex stopped. He didn't let go of her hand. He just stood there, watching the rain fall, then turned to Lucy. "I used to think control was love," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "I thought if I kept everything within reach, no one would get hurt." Lucy tilted her head, her smile warm and lightly amused. "And the result was, everyone got tired." Alex laughed, this time without embarrassment. "Yeah." She squeezed his hand very gently, not to reassure him, but as an acknowledgement. "Love," Lucy said softly, "is letting the other person not have to defend themselves. It's knowing you can be beside each other, without being on guard." Alex looked at her, with nothing left to hide in his eyes. "When I'm with you, I don't feel the need to control anything." "That's good," Lucy replied, her smile gentle. "I'm not good at loving while on alert." He smiled, awkward but sincere. "I'm not good at loving according to a plan either." "Perfect," Lucy said. "Two people who aren't good at it, meeting each other." The space between them closed naturally. No kiss, just forehead to forehead, breaths mingling, and a deep warmth, the kind that comes from no one trying to prove anything. They kept walking, hand in hand, in a comfortable silence. Lucy realized she didn't need to think, didn't need to guess, didn't need to protect herself. It was just a rainy evening, a warm cafe, and a man beside her, awkward, sincere, and gentle enough that she didn't feel the need to curl inward. Lucy thought, this is what love should feel like. No control, no explanations, just being there, together. Lucy couldn't remember exactly when Alex began to appear in her life as something inevitable. Not in big meetings, not in strategic decisions, but in very small moments. A cup of coffee already waiting on her desk late in the morning, a jacket draped over her shoulders when the office air conditioning got too cold, a short message near midnight just to ask, "Did you get home yet?" There was no confession, no boundaries drawn out loud, just two people there long enough for each other's presence to become a habit. And that was precisely what made it dangerous. That night they worked late again, not because they had to, but because neither of them wanted to leave yet. Lucy stood in front of the design board, her high bun slightly messy, stylus in hand, bare feet against the cold floor. Alex sat behind her, leaning back against the table, studying the simulation and shaking his head with a quiet laugh. "You know," he said lightly, "I've never seen light look this provocative." Lucy turned to him, one eyebrow raised. "Are you complimenting me or flirting in disguise?" Alex laughed. "I'm trying to do both. Apparently, I'm not very good at it." "See?" Lucy said, setting the stylus down and stepping closer. "Power doesn't help much with things like this." "I'm learning," Alex replied, very seriously. The distance between them closed without either of them noticing how. Lucy leaned back against the table, Alex standing right in front of her. No touching. Not yet. But their eyes no longer bothered pretending restraint. In the room lit only by warm yellow light, everything else seemed to fade away. Lucy tilted her head up first, not teasing, not challenging, just a natural movement, as if her body already knew where to go. Alex froze for exactly one beat. His smile faded, his gaze darkened. "Lucy," he said her name, low and slow. She didn't answer. Lucy reached up to adjust his collar. Very slowly. Very close. "You talk too much," she whispered. "I thought you were learning silence." Alex couldn't hold back anymore. The kiss came faster than thought, deep and hot, carrying all the restrained nights, the cut-off glances, the moments of turning away just in time. It wasn't tentative, and it wasn't rough. It was full, certain, and left no room for retreat. Lucy responded immediately. No hesitation, no analysis. She pulled him closer, letting them collide in a moment of complete loss of control. Her heart raced, her cheeks burned, but her mind was strangely calm. She wasn't afraid. Alex's hand closed around her waist, holding her tightly, as if afraid that letting go would make everything disappear. Lucy let out a soft laugh against his mouth, small but vividly alive. "Mr. Vale," she murmured, lips still brushing his. "Do you know you kiss far too seriously?" Alex's voice was rough. "I don't know how to do it any other way." "That's fine," Lucy said, then kissed him again. Slower, deeper. "I like it this way." The kiss lingered, unhurried, with no need to go further to prove anything. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads touched, their breaths mingling. Alex looked at Lucy as if seeing her for the first time, not as talent, not as a challenge, but as a woman he wanted to stay with. "Dangerous," he said quietly. Lucy smiled, her eyes bright, warm, and very alive. "Yeah, but the kind of danger that doesn't make you want to run." They sat down on the floor, backs against the table, sharing a bottle of water, laughing about trivial things. The fact that Alex once didn't know how to cook instant noodles, the time Lucy almost quit the profession because a design was criticized for using the wrong font. Everything felt strangely lighter, as if that kiss hadn't complicated things, but had simplified them. Lucy rested her head on Alex's shoulder. She didn't think about tomorrow, about Vale, about Aurora, about power or boundaries. She only knew that here, now, she didn't need to defend herself, didn't need to prove anything, didn't need to run. Alex bent down and kissed her hair, very softly, very slowly. Not a kiss of possession, but of staying. And in that moment, Lucy understood. Some loves don't arrive with promises. They arrive as a feeling that you are allowed to be yourself, fully, burning, and at peace all at once. Lucy woke to a very unfamiliar kind of light, not the harsh glare of morning, and not the familiar darkness of late working nights. It was a soft, pale golden light, slipping through the curtains, brushing the ceiling, then sliding down her shoulder like the lightest touch. The room was so quiet that Lucy could hear her own breathing. Slow, deep, steady. And then she realized she wasn't alone. Alex lay beside her, not close enough to feel overwhelming, not far enough to feel cold. One of his arms rested loosely behind her back, not holding, not restraining, just there, solid, real. Lucy didn't open her eyes right away. She let her body register at first, the warmth, the familiar scent, the sense of safety that felt almost dangerous. Dangerous because she had never allowed herself to be still like this with anyone. Lucy turned slowly. Alex was still asleep, lashes casting shadows on his cheekbones, his face stripped of anything sharp, anything belonging to Vale Group. No control, no authority. Just a man who had burned through the night with her and was still here when the fire had briefly settled. She lifted her hand and placed it on his chest. His heartbeat was steady, strong. Lucy let out a soft laugh. "You really don't know how to retreat." Alex opened his eyes immediately, as if he hadn't been deeply asleep at all. "I have no intention of doing that." "I know," Lucy said gently. "Neither do I." There was no rushed kiss, no verbal confirmation, just their eyes holding each other long enough for the fire to return. Low, hot, needing no spark. Lucy leaned forward, forehead touching his, breaths intertwining, and this time, she didn't wait for him to lead. Alex inhaled sharply, his hand tightening around her waist, for the first time without restraint. Lucy felt that response clearly, and in that moment she understood. This was no longer a moment of crossing a boundary, but a choice to stay on the other side of it. "Lucy," Alex said, his voice hoarse, barely controlled. If this feels too fast, she pressed a finger to his lips, cutting him off. Don't ruin it with reason. He let out a helpless, quiet laugh, then pulled her closer. There was no need to go further to prove the fire was still burning. The way he looked at her was enough, as if he had already decided not to step back. They stayed together all morning, not through anything dramatic, but through ordinary intimacy. Alex making coffee while Lucy stood behind him, adjusting his collar. Lucy cutting fruit while Alex leaned against the counter, watching her as if she were something precious. Bumping into each other in the small space, laughing, then falling into long, comfortable silence. Do you realize you're doing something very dangerous? Alex asked as Lucy sat on the kitchen counter, her legs swinging slightly. Yes, she answered immediately, but it's the kind of danger that makes me feel alive. Alex stepped closer. I used to think control was love. Lucy tilted her head, smiling, her eyes warm and bright. And I used to think love meant protecting myself. And now? Now, she said slowly, pulling him in by the collar. I choose to stay with the person who makes me not need to. This kiss wasn't rushed, but it was deeper and hotter than the night before. No longer a sudden ignition, but a fire that had caught and would keep burning, with nothing left to prove. Alex responded with everything he had. No power, no strategy, just complete presence. The afternoon passed slowly. Lucy stood by the window, wearing Alex's shirt, holding a cup of cold coffee. The city below was still loud, but it no longer reached her. Alex stood behind her, not embracing her, just resting his forehead against her shoulder. Do you regret it? He asked softly. Lucy shook her head. No. I only regret waiting so long to allow myself to burn. Alex smiled and kissed her shoulder. I'll never put that fire out. Lucy turned to face him, her gaze both gentle and unyielding. Good, because I won't let anyone do that anymore. Outside, the city lights flicked on one by one. Inside the room, the fire was still burning. Not loud, not consuming, but hot enough for both of them to know. This wasn't a moment they would pass through, but a point of no return, where they chose each other in the fire without fear of being burned. Aurora Living had been mentioned in the press more in the past 6 months than in the previous 3 years combined. Not because of scale, not because of the budget, but because of the design language. People began calling Aurora the place where light has emotion, the company that transformed living spaces into emotional experiences. Interviewers no longer asked Lucy Morgan how she achieved success, but why she dared to trust her emotions in an industry as cold as this one. Lucy's answer was brief. Because I never believed beauty should have to ask for permission. She stood on the stage of an international design conference, wearing a simple dress, the lights falling just softly enough. Below her were people who had once doubted her, measured her by old standards, and called emotion a weakness. Lucy didn't look at them with a sense of victory. She no longer needed that. She was standing exactly where she belonged, and that feeling was so complete, there was no room left for resentment. Aurora became a new symbol, and Lucy became the one who led it. That evening, Alex stood backstage dressed in a dark suit, his phone still filled with unanswered calls from the Vail Group board. He had just been officially appointed CEO, not because he was better at controlling, but because he knew when to step back and let others shine. He watched Lucy walk off the stage. She smiled at him before embracing her colleagues, a familiar smile, confident, alive, needing no protection. Alex realized with perfect clarity that he didn't love Lucy because she needed him. He loved her because she didn't need anyone to stand strong, yet still chose to stand beside him. They didn't celebrate loudly. No party, no champagne. Just a very ordinary evening on the balcony of Lucy's apartment. The city glowed below them. The wind was gentle. Lucy leaned against the railing, slipped off her heels, and let out a long breath. I'm tired, she said, not complaining, just honest. Alex handed her a glass of water. But you're happy, Lucy smiled. Very. He stood beside her, not touching her right away. A familiar pause, one that didn't need filling. Then Alex turned to her, his gaze no longer awkward as before, but still unmistakably sincere. Lucy, he said. No raised voice, no ceremony. I have a question. She turned to him, lifting an eyebrow. Sounds dangerous. I know, Alex smiled, but I don't want to wait until I'm perfect. I just want to ask while I'm most myself. He knelt down, not slowly, not dramatically, just one decisive movement. Lucy froze for exactly one heartbeat. Alex looked up at her, his eyes strangely calm. I'm not proposing because I need you. I'm proposing because my life is better with you in it. Because I want to wake up every day beside a woman who reminds me that power means nothing if it isn't shared. Lucy didn't cry. She laughed, a very Lucy laugh, trembling and alive all at once. You know, she said, one hand resting on her chest, I used to think that if one day you ever knelt in front of me, I'd make you explain a lot. Alex curved his mouth. And now? Now, Lucy said slowly, bending down to look straight into his eyes. I don't need you to prove anything anymore. She placed her hand over his, steady, certain. Yes, Lucy said, I'll marry you, not to become someone else, but to continue being myself, with you. Alex stood and wrapped his arms around her. Not tight, not possessive, just enough for both of them to feel it clearly. This was a choice, not an obligation. 1 year later, Aurora opened a new headquarters. Vale Group restructured under a very different leadership philosophy. Lucy and Alex didn't appear in the media as a so-called power couple. They didn't need to, because truly strong people don't need to be named. They only need to stand in the right place and choose each other once they are already whole.